The hangar of the Veil Dominion's flagship was unlike anything designed by human hands. It was cavernous, carved with jagged arches of alien alloy, and lined with glowing conduits pulsing like arteries. The air tasted of static and ozone, heavy with the energy bleeding from the ship's core. In the distance, faint tremors shook the floor as the ongoing fleet battle rattled the massive vessel. Every few seconds, shock waves thundered through the hull, but here, the war narrowed into something smaller, sharper, more personal. A single fight between two figures who represented two civilizations. One was a warrior born of domination, Zirath, the Veil's most celebrated champion. She towered over her opponent, clad in segmented black armor etched with runes of power. Her four glowing eyes tracked movement with cold precision, and her elongated fingers curled tightly around the hilt of the Voidblade. A weapon humming with such concentrated energy that even the walls vibrated with its presence. This was no ceremonial relic. The Voidblade had sliced apart cruisers in duels fought in vacuum. Entire campaigns had ended when Zirath stepped onto the battlefield. Her name was synonymous with terror. Her victories had paved the Dominion's path across the stars. The other figure was a man who looked, by comparison, completely breakable. Commander Cale Arden stood with no armor, no shield, no miracle weapon. His uniform was torn, streaked with ash and blood. A gash across his temple dripped into his left eye, and his right hand trembled faintly from the blow of a previous strike. His ribs ached with every breath. One of them surely cracked from the blast that had thrown him into this chamber. Yet for all his wounds, there was no surrender in him. His posture, ragged though it was, carried an edge of defiance, as if he had chosen to walk into this moment rather than stumble into it by chance. Zirath raised her weapon, the blade vibrating with a high-pitched whine that set Kyle's teeth on edge. Sparks crawled along its edge, shedding light that painted her silhouette in shades of crimson. Her voice cut through the thunder of alarms, harsh, resonant, and filled with certainty. "Any last words, human?" The line should have ended him, a ritual prelude to countless executions before. And yet, instead of fear, Cale smirked. It wasn't bravado born of arrogance. It was the half-mad grin of a man who had survived battles no one expected him to, who knew that even in the shadow of inevitable defeat, there was always an opening to be found. His teeth flashed white against the grime coating his face, and his eyes, bright with exhaustion, still burned with calculation. "Yeah," he answered, his voice hoarse but steady. "You're holding it wrong." The words were absurd, impossible. Nobody had ever dared correct Zirath, much less mock her. For a fleeting moment, her expression faltered, confusion bleeding into her otherwise impenetrable glare. Her lower pair of eyes narrowed, her grip tightening as though the blade itself had twitched in response to the insult. That instant of hesitation was all Cale needed. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged forward, closing the impossible gap between them. His boots hammered the metal floor, the clang echoing like a war drum. The Voidblade slashed down, a streak of searing light meant to cleave him in two. Cale twisted his body, the blade grazing past, leaving only a line of scorched fabric along his side. Pain flared, but he ignored it, his momentum carrying him inside her reach. His hand snapped up with a scavenged plasma dagger, a weapon meant for utility, not combat. Still, wielded with desperation and precision, it became a threat. The blade hissed as it scraped across Zirath's armor. The Veil Dominion had not simply arrived at humanity's borders. They had torn through them like predators through a herd. Their fleets descended on the outer colonies with terrifying coordination, shimmering ships that bent gravity fields to crush resistance before a single shot was fired. Entire worlds were silenced in days. Where they landed, the skies burned, oceans boiled, and cities vanished beneath plumes of violet fire. For the first time since the colonization age, humans discovered what it felt like to be prey. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. The Veil did not take prisoners to rule over. They harvested. They stripped planets of energy, minerals, and life, leaving behind lifeless shells that spun in silence. Their motives were never explained. They considered explanations beneath them. To the Veil, other species were fuel, resources to be consumed. Resistance was not only futile but laughable. The first encounters had been massacres. Human admirals, confident in their fleets, threw cruisers and destroyers into defensive lines, only to watch them dissolve under weapons that twisted matter apart. The Dominion's champions, individual warriors who carried personal weapons capable of splitting carriers in half, often arrived at the end of battles. Not because they were needed, but because they enjoyed displaying superiority. To humanity, it was a nightmare. To the Veil, it was theater. Yet humanity did not vanish. They adapted. Every slaughter became a lesson. Surviving officers began recording Veil tactics, searching for weaknesses in their formations. Engineers learned how long their gravity weapons took to recharge. Marines began planting explosives inside destroyed vessels to take invaders down with them. Slowly, painfully, humanity stopped collapsing. They started resisting. Among those who stood tallest during those years was Cale Arden. Before the war, he had been considered brilliant but reckless, a commander too willing to improvise, too quick to gamble lives on instincts others mistrusted. War made that recklessness into an advantage. He was the one who dragged a crippled carrier through a collapsing wormhole, using his ship's thrusters as makeshift tow lines, saving 50,000 colonists at the cost of nearly all his own crew. He was the one who dared to mine an entire asteroid belt, detonating it in the middle of an enemy fleet, taking down ships humanity had never been able to pierce with direct fire. Men followed Cale because he refused to give up. Where other officers admitted defeat, Cale spat in the face of impossible odds and turned defeats into survival stories. He was the kind of leader who reminded humans what it meant to be stubborn. And that stubbornness was its own weapon. But none of his victories changed the scale of the war. For every Veil cruiser destroyed, 10 more arrived. For every colony held, 2 more were burned. The 7th Fleet, under Cale's command, became humanity's shield, bleeding itself dry to delay the Dominion long enough for scientists, engineers, and civilians to flee deeper into the core worlds. Each battle whittled them down further. The end came at Aralon Prime. The fleet of 100 ships, veterans hardened by fire, found themselves cornered by 2,000 Veil vessels. No trap would work, no escape path remained. The battle was less than an hour old when the outcome was clear. Human ships winked out one by one, shields collapsing, hulls rupturing. Even Cale's flagship, Resolute, buckled under the onslaught, torn apart until only fragments spun in orbit. Still, Kyle lived. He was dragged into the Dominion flagship during the slaughter, beaten, stripped of his weapons. To the Veil, keeping him alive was not mercy, it was humiliation. He had become a symbol of resistance among humans, and symbols were trophies worth breaking publicly. They paraded him through the flagship's corridors, watched by alien eyes that glowed with contempt, and threw him into the chamber where Xyrath, their most feared champion, waited with her Voidblade. The Dominion expected a swift execution. The galaxy expected silence. But Kyle was not a man who bent easily. Even wounded, even stripped of everything but a battered dagger scavenged in the chaos, he carried with him humanity's defining trait, the refusal to accept inevitability. And so, in the heart of the ship that had murdered his fleet, facing the weapon that had carved empires into dust, Cale prepared himself not to beg, not to break, but to fight. Because even if he was the last human alive in that chamber, Cale Arden knew one truth that no alien could understand. As long as he drew breath, the war was not over. The Voidblade was alive in her grip. Its edge vibrated with a hungry hum, threads of violet energy spilling from it like smoke made of lightning. Each swing carved glowing scars into the walls, sending molten rivulets dripping down as if the metal itself were bleeding. Cale had fought against impossible odds before, but never against something like this. Xyrath wasn't merely fast. She was a storm wrapped in armor. Every strike she delivered could have ended him. Her movements were so precise they looked inevitable, as if physics itself bent to her will. The first clash nearly killed him. She stepped in with a downward arc, the blade screeching against the air. Kyle barely pivoted aside, the Voidblade missing his skull by a hand's width. The floor beneath him split open, smoke erupting as though the ship itself recoiled from the cut. Heat scorched his side, filling his lungs with the scent of burned fabric and flesh. He rolled away, scrambled to his feet, and countered with a jab of his plasma dagger. The weapon's small arc of blue light hissed as it collided with her armor, leaving a shallow groove but no real damage. Zirath snarled. "Not from pain, but from the insult of being touched. You scratch me with toys?" Her 4 eyes blazed as she spun, striking again. "You insult the Dominion itself." Kael didn't answer. His silence wasn't cowardice. It was concentration. He wasn't trying to overwhelm her with brute strength. That would be suicide. Instead, he watched. Every dodge, every stumble was calculated to test her reach. Every failed stab was meant to measure how far she committed to each strike. Her Voidblade howled through the air again. Kyle dropped to one knee, sliding beneath it, sparks showering his back as the edge kissed the wall behind him. He felt the vibration in his bones. She was fast, impossibly so, but not perfect. Her grip on the hilt, though strong, was stiff. Too stiff. The blade resisted being controlled, and Kyle saw it drag her arcs just slightly wide at the end of each motion. That was the flaw. He pressed her harder, darting in and out, forcing her to swing repeatedly. Each time, her attacks grew. Faster but also wilder, the Voidblade fighting her control. Her confidence blinded her to it. She had won so many duels, crushed so many enemies, that the idea of needing precision was foreign to her. She believed raw power was enough. Kael's ribs ached with every breath, but pain was an old companion. He ignored it, using it as fuel. His mind raced, analyzing angles. If he could push her to overcommit, her own blade would become her weakness. The chamber around them was a ruin now. Support beams had been severed. Sparks rained from torn conduits. The floor plates glowed where the Voidblade had touched them, yet Kyle used the destruction to his advantage, weaving between debris, using smoke to mask his steps, forcing her to swing wider, harder. "You are nothing," Zirath thundered, slamming her blade into a collapsed girder. It split with a blinding flash. "Your kind crawled from dirt, and I will cut you back into dust." Kyle gritted his teeth, ducking behind a sparking panel. "Funny," he muttered under his breath. "For someone so powerful, you sure miss a lot." He feinted left, then darted right, driving his dagger upward with all the strength he had. This time, he aimed not for her chest plate, but the joint where her shoulder met the armor. The dagger bit deep, sparks exploding outward as the plasma ate into alien alloy. Zirath screamed, a raw, furious sound that shook the chamber. She stumbled back, clawing at the weapon, ripping it free. Smoke poured from the wound, shallow but undeniable. For the first time in centuries, the champion of the Veil bled in single combat. Kael staggered, chest heaving, blood dripping from his burns. He could barely keep his eyes open, yet he grinned through the exhaustion. He had drawn blood. He had proven she wasn't untouchable. Shirath's roar turned into laughter, deep and guttural. "You wound me, insect? Good. That means I can savor the kill." Kael spat blood onto the floor, lifting his chin defiantly. "Savor it while you can," he rasped, "because I'm not done." Her eyes narrowed, blazing with hate and pride all at once. She raised the Voidblade again, its hum swelling like a scream, but Kael no longer saw an invincible goddess. He saw a soldier with a flaw, and in war, one flaw was all humanity needed. The flagship shuddered as explosions rippled across its decks. The war outside hadn't slowed. Human frigates were still darting between behemoth Dominion cruisers, exchanging fire with weapons that should have torn them apart instantly. But inside the monstrous vessel, a second battle had ignited. One, far more dangerous. A handful of survivors against the strongest war machine in the sector. Kael's voice cut through the comms, sharp and steady despite the duel raging around him. "Deck 12, power conduits, cut them. Vent the coolant into the starboard sections. Make it burn from the inside out." Scattered survivors obeyed without hesitation. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were wounded pilots, engineers, medics who had fought their way aboard after their ships were destroyed. Yet when Kale gave orders, chaos turned into purpose. The Dominion's corridors lit with gunfire. As humans advanced in bursts, laying charges, ripping panels off walls to reroute energy flows, leaving destruction in their wake. Xerath pursued Kale through the vessel's reactor chamber, every swing of her Voidblade tearing new scars into the flagship's heart. The chamber was immense, a cathedral of alien machinery humming with lethal energy. Columns of pulsating light reached skyward, feeding the ship's core, while narrow bridges crisscrossed the abyss below. The heat pressed down like a furnace, and the air was thick with smoke from ruptured conduits. Kyle limped across one of the bridges, forcing Xerath to follow. She charged, blade slashing arcs of violet fire, severing railings and leaving molten gaps in the structure. Kale ducked low, letting another strike whistle past his head, then triggered a calm click with his jaw. "Charges on Junction 4! Now!" A boom split the chamber. One of the support towers collapsed, cascading sparks into the void below. The entire deck lurched sideways as the ship's stabilizers failed. Xerath staggered, her balance momentarily broken. Kyle dove forward, ramming his shoulder into her midsection. For an instant, it seemed madness, tackling a warrior twice, his size, but the impact forced her to stumble back across the unstable bridge. Her claws scraped against the floor, desperate for purchase. "You dare!" she roared. Kale didn't let her finish. He stabbed upward with his plasma dagger, aiming again for her joints. The blade scraped off her gauntlet, but left another smoking groove. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to enrage. Xerath swung wildly, her void blade shrieking through the bridge supports. Metal shriveled under the weapon's fury, sections of the walkway dropping into the core's abyss. Kale retreated step by step, every movement calculated to drag her deeper into the chamber, closer to the reactor's vulnerable heart. Meanwhile, his scattered teams carried out his plan. In corridors 3 decks below, humans forced Dominion soldiers into ambushes, detonating explosives that ripped through squads unprepared for such suicidal ferocity. Vent systems flooded sections of the ship with superheated plasma, choking defenders in their own war machine. Every small sabotage bought Kale another chance to survive, but Xerath was not slowing. Her laughter echoed over the rumble of failing systems. "You bleed this ship! It will not matter! Even dying, it will outlast you!" Kale's chest burned with exhaustion, but his grin never faded. He needed her arrogant, furious, distracted. He needed her to swing one more time with all her might. The Voidblade came down in a killing arc, humming so loud it drowned out the alarms. Kale twisted sideways, teeth gritted against the heat, and seized her wrist. With a brutal wrench, he shifted the weapon just inches. But that was enough. Instead of cutting him, the blade plunged into the reactor housing behind him. The world detonated in light. Energy howled through the chamber, columns of fire bursting from the core. Consoles erupted, spraying molten fragments. Xerath staggered back, momentarily stunned, as arcs of uncontrolled power licked across her armor. Kyle dropped to one knee, half blinded by the glare, but he forced the words through cracked lips. "Wrong grip!" The ship wailed in protest, systems cascading into meltdown. Decks collapsed above as fires spread unchecked. Across the flagship, Dominion soldiers scrambled to contain the disaster. But it was too late. The reactor was unraveling, a chain reaction spiraling toward catastrophe. For the humans still alive aboard, the order came through in Kale's strained but steady voice. "Fall back. Pods, shuttles, anything that flies. Get off this beast before it tears itself apart." They moved with desperate speed, abandoning firefights, dragging wounded comrades onto escape craft. Some wouldn't make it, but enough would. Enough to spread the story of what had just happened. A single man turning the Dominion's pride into a tomb, and at the heart of it, Kale faced Xerath one last time. the reactor's blinding fury framing them in a hell of fire and steel. The tide had turned. The flagship was coming apart. The reactor's overload rippled through its spine, tearing apart bulkheads as if some angry god had reached inside and wrenched the ship's bones loose. Fire roared through its innards, sweeping across decks where alien soldiers once stood untouchable. Entire sections buckled, splitting into drifting debris that spun in the black void outside. In the middle of this inferno, Kale and Zirath clashed. The collapsing chamber had become their arena, lit by wild flashes of energy, beams sparking like lightning across the fractured reactor. Gravity failed in bursts, sending chunks of molten alloy drifting upward before slamming them back down as the ship's stabilizers fought a losing battle. Every second, the battlefield shifted. Kyle barely clung to consciousness. His body was failing, ribs grating with every breath, burns streaking his arms, blood loss making the edges of his vision swim dark. But his focus sharpened in the chaos. He knew this fight couldn't be escaped. He had no fleet left, no reinforcements close enough to save him. The only way out was through her. Zirath came at him with a frenzy born of rage and humiliation. Her Voidblade screamed arcs of violet death, shredding steel walkways into molten ribbons. Her strikes were heavier now, less controlled, fueled by raw fury. The wound Kale had carved in her armor hissed with each motion, leaking dark smoke, but it hadn't slowed her. If anything, it made her faster. You think this ship's death will mean your victory? She snarled, forcing Kale back across a fractured platform. You kill nothing but yourself. Kyle ducked, narrowly avoiding another strike that split a column behind him. He gripped his plasma dagger tighter, though its glow flickered weakly from overuse. If I take you with me, he rasped, it's worth it. Their blades met. Hers, a weapon that could end civilizations. His, a tool barely fit for combat. Sparks erupted as steel kissed plasma. The impact drove Kale to one knee, the weight of her strength threatening to crush him outright. But he twisted, letting her power slide past and slashed upward in return. His dagger tore a shallow groove across her throat guard. Not enough to kill, but enough to force her back. The ship lurched again. A section of the reactor collapsed, vomiting fire into the chamber. Shrapnel spun in every direction. Kale shielded his face with his arm as fragments slashed through the air. One shard embedded itself into his shoulder, drawing a strangled grunt of pain. Zirath walked through the storm untouched, her armor glowing red-hot but unbroken. You are stubborn, she growled. Like all your kind. But stubbornness is not strength, Kale spat blood, staggering upright. No, he said, his voice low but firm. But it's the reason you'll lose. He baited her again, feigning weakness, dragging his steps as though his body was collapsing. Zirath lunged for the kill, Voidblade flashing. At the last instant, Kale dropped to the side, seizing her wrist as she overextended. With a surge of desperation, he drove his plasma dagger directly into the exposed wound near her chest. The blade sank deeper this time, hissing as it chewed through alien armor and into flesh. Zirath's scream shook the chamber. She slammed her fist into Kyle's side, the blow nearly shattering his ribs, but he held on, twisting the dagger with everything he had left. You cannot win! She roared, 4 eyes burning like furnaces. Kale's face twisted into a bloody grin. Winning doesn't mean never falling. It means getting back up when no one else can. He shoved the dagger deeper, sparks erupting in a fountain of light. And that's why you fear us, her strength faltered. The Voidblade slipped from her grasp, spinning into the wreckage below, its hum fading as it vanished into fire. Kale collapsed with her, both tumbling onto the broken deck as the ship convulsed around them. Above, the sky outside the collapsing hangar shifted. Streaks of light pierced the void. Reinforcements, human ships dropping from hyperspace, drawn by Kale's desperate signal before the duel began. They had come too late to save the 7th Fleet, but not too late to see the Dominion's flagship tearing itself apart. Kale's vision blurred. He barely registered the new arrivals, only the heat of the reactor's meltdown washing over him. He pushed himself onto his side, staring at Zirath's unmoving form, smoke curling from her armor. She was finished. The flagship screamed its death knell as the core destabilized. Explosions tore through its body, sending pieces spinning into orbit like flaming asteroids. Pods and shuttles jettisoned from breaches, carrying the surviving humans who had boarded. Kyle lay there, exhausted, broken, but alive. He had struck down the Dominion's greatest warrior. He had crippled their pride and proved they could bleed. For him, the end was near. But for humanity, this was the beginning of something far greater. The fire consumed the void. The wreck of the Dominion flagship burned against the canvas of the stars, its twisted carcass breaking apart into streaks of molten light. Whole sections peeled away, scattering like dying embers across the void. The Dominion had lost not just a warship, but its symbol of invincibility, and with it its most feared warrior. Inside the wreckage, Kale floated in the ruin. His lungs burned, blood ran cold in his veins, but consciousness refused to abandon him. Every heartbeat was agony, yet he clung to life with the same stubbornness that had carried him through the battle. Survival to him wasn't victory, but he wasn't done yet. Humanity needed more than a martyr. It needed a living flame. Emergency lights flickered across a half-collapsed corridor. Human Marines stormed in, helmets glowing faintly in the smoke. One froze at the sight of him, broken and bloodied but alive. "Admiral Kale!" The soldier shouted through comms. "We found him!" Hands dragged him onto a stretcher, voices overlapping. Disbelief, awe, fear. For many, he was supposed to be dead. For all, he was now something more. Proof that the Dominion's terror could be faced and overcome. Shuttles tore free from the crumbling wreck, engines flaring as they raced toward the safety of the fleet. The surviving human ships, battered but burning with new fire, closed ranks around them. For the first time in years, the Dominion's advance was not inevitable. News spread faster than any ship. The destruction of the flagship, the fall of Xerath, the impossible survival of Kyle, it rolled across colonies like a shockwave. Where despair had ruled, whispers rose. Soldiers once resigned to defeat lifted their weapons with pride. Civilians who had prepared for surrender now spoke of resistance. Humanity had bled, but humanity had struck back. The Dominion, shaken, attempted to bury the humiliation. Xerath's death was unthinkable. To admit she had fallen to a human would fracture the illusion of their supremacy. But silence carried its own danger, for Dominion soldiers had witnessed it themselves. Some whispered the truth across their ranks. The humans were dangerous. Kale awoke in a med bay, the world blurring into sterile white. Tubes fed into his veins, monitors traced the jagged rhythm of his heart. He tried to sit up, but a firm hand pushed him down. "You shouldn't even be alive," the medic muttered, awe mixing with exasperation. Kale's voice rasped like torn metal. "Alive? Enough." Outside his room, the corridors of the carrier buzzed with activity. Soldiers and officers gathered, speaking his name like it was more than a man's, like it was a banner. They had seen heroes before, but this was different. Kale hadn't just fought. He had taken their greatest nightmare and broken it with nothing but grit and will. The high command soon arrived, faces hard but eyes betraying something rare: hope. They had lost fleets, cities, millions of lives, but in Kale they saw leverage. "A rallying point, a weapon of morale sharper than any blade. You've given humanity more than survival," one general said. "You've given us a future to fight for." Kale turned his head, weary but unyielding. "Then make it count. Don't waste this." Across the stars, monuments rose where news of the battle spread. Some carved Kale's likeness in stone, standing defiant against the void. Others painted murals of a lone soldier holding a blade against the darkness. Songs, chants, and oaths carried his name. Not as a commander, but as the man who proved the Dominion could be wounded. For the Dominion, it was a fracture they couldn't seal. Armies once unquestioning now hesitated. Subjugated worlds whispered rebellion. The myth of their dominance had been pierced, and myths, once broken, never fully heal. Yet in the quiet moments, Kale knew the truth. He wasn't invincible. His body bore scars that would never heal. His strength diminished, his nights haunted by the duel in the burning ship. He hadn't defeated the Dominion. He had only bought humanity time, but time was everything. In council chambers, he stood again, battered but alive, addressing leaders who once planned for retreat. His voice, ragged yet steady, carried the weight of survival forged in fire. "The Dominion bleeds. That's all we needed to know. We can fight. We can win. But we must do it together." The room erupted not with argument, but with resolve. Humanity, fractured for so long, began to unite under the banner his survival had created. The legend spread even further than Cale could imagine. To children on frontier colonies, he was a story whispered before sleep, the man who stood where no one else could. To soldiers, he was proof that courage mattered more than fear. To enemies, he was a shadow, the one human whose defiance had scarred their empire. Cale himself carried none of that glory. He carried only the memory of fire, of blood, of a blade sinking into alien armor while the universe collapsed around him. He knew others would follow, greater warriors, greater leaders. He was not the savior. He was the spark, and sometimes a spark was all it took to set the stars ablaze.